local news up, or with his expanded local newscast, rather. Leadership for the city of Clinton is diving headfirst to evaluate its strategic plan, and part of that is making sure the city code is easier to understand. Clinton Police Chief Ben Lowers has been appreciative of the effort to provide better clarity, not just for his officers, but for the community.
Again, while it has garnished some public attention, nothing real earth-shattering there. More so, as much as anything of changing things, it's probably more so of making things more clear and more cut and dried, more clear in terms of like vehicle storage, okay? Vehicle storage or accumulation of rubbish or garbage, defining kind of what that is. And Seth, the thing of it is, and the topic that I have to continually have with not only members of the public, but with our own staff and our own leadership, is that as opposed to popular belief, this is not a revenue generating issue within the city. What we're dealing with are kind of those extremes.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned earlier the grass, okay, the tall grass. We don't come around with a ruler and see if your grass is 8 1/4 inches tall. Where we apply that is these places that have not been maintained, not been mowed at all. Sometimes it's an abandoned property or a vacant property or a property that's gone into foreclosure. And
the city recently hired a new code enforcement officer, and Chief Flowers indicates he's starting to get a good feel for the community and is doing a good job working with the community to get some properties cleaned up.
That is part of that is another topic under the police department's portion of the strategic plan, and that is, it kind of falls between the police department and the city administration, city administrator, in terms of code enforcement and enhancing that program. And we have made some headway there. We've got a little ways to go yet, but with the hiring of Rick Crispin, with the retirement or resignation of part-time officer Larry Wooling last fall, in the latter part of winter, we replaced him with Rick Crispin, who's kind of up and running and gone through some training and whatnot, and really just now kind of getting out there independently and kind of getting comfortable in his position. So that was certainly a goal within that aspect of the strategic plan. Another major aspect of that was review and amendment of some codes within our code book.
According to Chief Flowers, the city is truly after the extreme cases of neglect or excessive property neglect.
As opposed to popular belief, this is not a revenue generating issue within the city. What we're dealing with are kind of those extremes.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned earlier the grass, okay, the tall grass. We don't come around with a ruler and see if your grass is 8 1/4 inches tall.
Mm-hmm.
Where we apply that is these places that have not been maintained, not been mowed at all. Sometimes it's an abandoned property or a vacant property or a property that's gone into foreclosure. And while oftentimes we get some pushback from that, shall we say, offender or violator, what the public doesn't hear are the multiple phone calls that myself or our office fields from neighbors and people in the area of, hey, have you seen this property? And, this needs, there's a vehicle out there that's got trees growing up from underneath it and, a tarp over the top of it and this and that. It's just unsightly in the neighborhood. When we live in town, we expect us to be a good neighbor. And quite frankly, it is the city's obligation. It's their choice and to a degree their obligation to set forth some general guidelines and expectations of property maintenance. With Mayor Michelossi and City Administrator Harris coming on, we're kind of all on the same board here. We're kind of all on this. Going in the same direction that, we do have some areas that need to be cleaned up and we need to be more proactive in that. And we're doing so.
The Chief Flowers reiterates his department's stance is they are seeking compliance over issuing citations and fines. The Farmer City Council has declined a solar proposal for Farmer City. At its meeting earlier this week, the City Council declined the proposal after hearing from individuals in the community it would impact.
What this conversation was is, hey, here's where this developer's interested in looking at putting in solar development. Council, what's your guys' take on that? And we simply just had a discussion. Each member kind of had their own reasons of why they did not support it ultimately. And we had some public testimony that, and I've never had a round of applause at a city council meeting before after a discussion. So that was kind of interesting in a good way. It was,
the town supported what was decided on, huh?
Yeah. There was a couple that really would have been impacted by this, just by the location. And there was another individual who had a business, and so they voiced their concerns. And
that's City Manager Taylor Baxter, who explains any proposed development within a mile and a half of city limits must get approval from the municipality before the project can go to the DeWitt County Board for approval.
There was a developer who was interested in a piece of land outside of Farmer City. It was about a mile and a half-ish. And the county actually has ordinances, because it wouldn't be within the city of Farmer City's city limits, like I just said. So the county has certain rules and regulations that these solar developers need to get before they come to the county to get approval, or just talking about it and submitting that permit. So it's kind of on a case-by-case basis, because there's going to be, maybe one eventually that, you know what, there's no growth that's going to happen that way. The exact same thing we were talking about in Clinton with solar and all this stuff when I was there too, is you got to kind of look at that comprehensive plan and what's the long-term vision of the city. And for this location, they felt like it was not a good spot.
Many communities are very closed off to the idea of solar development, but Baxter is hopeful in Farmer City they would analyze each proposal on an individualized basis.
Certain council members, it's going to be a no every time. But I think it would not be very wise of us to just make a blanket statement of just no all the time. Because like I said, if there's not a real growth opportunity, or because there are things like a community benefit agreement, and this is something that these solar developers do, is they want to be able to help the community that they're going to be impacting, and there's real benefits to that. And if we're just going to say blanket no all the time, and there's a parcel of land that makes sense, and I think it'd be wise for us to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But that's the beauty of the city council, and they get to decide all of that, and I just get direction on how to proceed.
Thanks to the CEJA Act in Illinois, Baxter indicates it is possible for a company to build in a given area, even if the community turns them down, depending on its willingness to pursue the case in the court system. The DeWitt and Piatt County Farm Bureaus have long been looking for a new Ag in the Classroom coordinator, and the search is now over. Pam Chambers stepped into the role in March, and told Regional Radio on the Noon Farm Show Wednesday, after retiring from 30 years of teaching, she was in search of a way to get back into the classroom and still have an impact on youth.
Funny story. I just was trying to enjoy retirement. I've retired from the classroom, and I spent a year or so just being retired and doing some sub in the local schools to kind of scratch that itch, but I'm not feeling very fulfilled, kind of feeling bored and purposeless. And I was scrolling on Facebook one day and saw the ad that was put out for this supposed position, and I never dreamed it would be for me, but I pursued it, and it just happened. And I'm so grateful and excited about it. Yeah, so I've been a teacher my whole career, and I've been in the classroom every year for my whole career. I started a preschool at a young age, and then moved to public school and taught in Champaign for 20 years. Really enjoyed that. And taught in Iowa for 10. And I just spent a lot of time in different classrooms in different locations.
As a Chicago native, Chambers did not grow up with experiences in agriculture, and as she progressed through the onboarding process, she leaned on Sarah Caper, the Champaign County Ag in the Classroom director. The National Weather Service in Lincoln is collaborating with the University of Illinois Extension to enhance awareness of when dust storms may pose a risk in central Illinois. Dust storms have been on the rise in just the last 2 to 3 years in Illinois, highlighted by a deadly pileup on Interstate 55 south of Springfield in 2023. Ed Shimon with the National Weather Service in Lincoln explains he reached out to Reagan Tibbs, commercial ag educator with the extension in Logan County, to get a better idea of field conditions. He believes this information could be the missing piece in predicting dust storms.
Sure, yeah, and we reached out to him as well. Due to the dust storm frequency coming up here that's happened in the last several years, we wanted to get an indication of how can we maybe work better with the farming community and get information from what the status of the fields are, because that's our biggest question mark. I mean, we know the winds are going to pick up and that it's been dry, but the status of the fields is the wild card that we don't know when we're trying to issue and get ahead of these dust storms. And Reagan provided us some information about how the fields get into a certain condition that may be conducive for dust storms. And possibly, it's really difficult to get a scope of what the field's conditions are. But, any way we can get that information from the extension, or if he has any kind of avenues to gather that kind of information, he's willing to provide us with it as much as we can when we get dust storm kind of conditions in the April, May, possibly even early June timeframes.
Shipman indicates they are specifically looking to learn more about soil conditions. The growing number of widespread dust events leads Shipman to believe this is due to changes in soil types, as well as a practice called drain tiling, which allows soil to dry out quicker than it ever has. News time is 18 minutes after 7 o'clock here on this Thursday. Get news anytime from your computer or mobile device at DeWittDailyNews.com. Coming up, we take